The sun shone over the quiet suburbs of Scarborough, Ontario. Streets lined with maple trees, picket fences, and well-manicured lawns whispered the illusion of safety. Parents let their children play outside. Teenagers biked home from school without fear. It was the 1990s, and the media was obsessed with love stories, the golden couple next door, and the rising allure of the perfect life. And that's what they looked like. Perfect. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Blonde, young, attractive, photogenic. Together they smiled in family portraits, strolled hand in hand through shopping malls, and posed like models for magazine covers that never existed. They were Canada's own version of a fairy tale couple, until the truth came out. Beneath the smiles was something monstrous, a darkness that couldn't be seen in photographs or heard in casual conversation. Behind closed doors, the golden couple was orchestrating crimes so vile, so inhumane, that when the truth surfaced, it would shatter a nation's sense of innocence. They weren't just lovers, they were predators, and their story wasn't a fairy tale, it was a nightmare. A city gripped by fear. Before the country knew their names, Paul Bernardo was already terrorizing Toronto's eastern suburbs. Between 1987 and 1990, more than a dozen young women had been sexually assaulted by an unidentified man. He was dubbed the Scarborough Rapist. He stalked bus stops, parking lots, and quiet walkways, striking without mercy, then vanishing like a ghost. The assaults were brutal and calculated. Each victim described a handsome, articulate man in his 20s with a chilling calmness in his voice. Despite composite sketches and increasing police pressure, the rapist remained uncaught. Every young woman in Scarborough learned to walk in pairs, clutch keys between their fingers, and glance over their shoulders every few seconds. What no one realized was that the monster everyone feared had a charming smile, a business degree, and a girlfriend who knew more than she let on. The Blonde Prince. Paul Bernardo was the boy mothers wanted their daughters to date. Clean-cut, polite, with dreams of becoming an accountant or even a lawyer. Born in 1964 and raised in a troubled home, Paul learned early how to wear masks. He smiled on cue, said all the right things, and knew how to manipulate. Underneath, he was a ticking bomb. Paul grew up idolizing money, control, and dominance. By his teenage years, he was already shoplifting, manipulating women, and experimenting with violence. His relationships were filled with gaslighting, degradation, and cruelty. But when he met Karla Homolka in 1987, everything changed. She didn't run, she leaned in. The Barbie doll. Karla was just 17 when she met Paul at a pet convention in Scarborough. A veterinary technician with golden hair and a love for animals, she looked like every parent's dream. But behind the sweetness was a dangerous obsession, an infatuation with Paul that blurred every boundary. When they locked eyes, there was an instant connection. Karla was drawn to Paul's charisma, his confidence, and his dominance. And Paul? He saw something rare. Not just a partner, but a puppet. Together they created their own twisted world, a fantasy where violence and desire danced hand in hand. Karla enabled Paul's darkness. She didn't try to stop it. She helped feed it. She wanted to keep him at any cost. The hidden horrors begin. While the police chased shadows and composite sketches, Paul and Karla began weaving their nightmare tapestry behind closed doors. Paul confessed to Karla that he was the Scarborough Rapist, and instead of recoiling, she protected him, even encouraged him. And soon their obsessions spiraled from rape to murder. The first known victim was someone close. Too close. Tammy Homolka, Karla's own younger sister. Tammy was just 15 years old, sweet, naive, and trusting of her sister's boyfriend. But Paul was obsessed with her. He called her the virgin he deserved. Karla, desperate to please him, agreed to a horrifying plan. On Christmas Eve 1990, the couple drugged Tammy with animal-grade tranquilizers stolen from Karla's clinic. They videotaped themselves raping her unconscious body. But something went wrong. Tammy began choking. She never woke up. Panicked, Paul and Karla dressed her, cleaned the scene, and called 911. The death was ruled an accident, aspiration after drinking. and no one suspected a thing. They got away with it, and they smiled through her funeral. A nation on the brink, the Scarborough rapist had stopped striking in public. But the monster hadn't disappeared. He was simply evolving. Now emboldened by their ability to deceive, Paul and Karla escalated. Their next targets would not be random strangers. They would be chosen. Teenage girls, lured into their home, captured, tortured, filmed, and discarded. The story was no longer about a serial rapist. It was now about a killer couple, hidden in plain sight. The streets of Ontario would never feel safe again. This is the Untold Trace, and I am your host. Behind every love story, there's a truth no camera captures. Behind every pretty face, there's a mask that could be hiding something far darker. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka taught Canada a lesson it didn't want to learn. Uttered that evil can come dressed in designer smiles. That killers can cuddle in public, attend family dinners, and kiss each other goodnight before torturing someone in their basement. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the twisted world of Canada's most infamous couple. We'll unravel the horrifying details of their crimes, the shocking plea deal that divided a nation, and the unimaginable truth behind the videotapes that showed it all. If you haven't already, follow, and subscribe to The Untold Trace. More stories like this await. Stories that make you question everything you think you know about love, evil, and what happens behind closed doors. In 1987, a young man with a bright smile and soft-spoken demeanor was terrorizing the streets of Scarborough, Ontario. He wasn't a shadowy figure hiding in the night. He was a clean-cut, well-dressed charmer named Paul Bernardo. By day, he worked as an accountant. By night, he was the Scarborough rapist. Over the course of 3 years, at least 13 women were sexually assaulted by a man who struck with brutal precision. He was methodical, calculating, and eerily calm. Police had composite sketches, DNA samples, and multiple survivor accounts, but nothing stuck. Paul remained a ghost in the system, and with every successful escape, he grew bolder. In 1990, police finally brought Paul in for questioning. A tip from one of his former girlfriends had raised alarm. He matched the composite sketch, fit the profile, and had a disturbing past. He gave a DNA sample and answered questions politely. Then he was released. The sample went into a backlog, and Paul walked free. Around this time, Paul met Karla Homolka. She was 17, a bright and beautiful veterinary assistant from St. Catharines. On the surface, Karla was bubbly and wholesome. She loved animals, had close ties to her family, and dreamed of marriage and a quiet life. But when she met Paul, everything changed. Their connection was instant, intense, dangerous. Paul found in Karla not just a lover, but a student, a follower, a partner. He introduced her to violent sex, control, and sadism, and she didn't recoil. She leaned in. He confided in her about the Scarborough attacks, about his obsession with virgins, about his fantasies of domination and submission. Karla listened and enabled him. She even offered him something no one expected, her 15-year-old sister, Tammy. Tammy Homolka was sweet, innocent, and completely unaware of the monster her sister was dating. Paul became obsessed with her. He filmed her as she slept, stole her clothes, told Karla he deserved a virgin, and Karla agreed. On Christmas Eve 1990, while the Homolka family celebrated, Karla drugged Tammy with animal tranquilizers stolen from her clinic. She laced her eggnog with halcyon and waited for her to pass out. Then, together, Paul and Karla took Tammy to the basement. They turned on the camera, and they raped her. But Tammy began to choke. Foam formed around her mouth. She convulsed. She stopped breathing. Panicking, Paul and Karla redressed her, cleaned the scene, and called 911. When paramedics arrived, it was too late. Tammy was pronounced dead. The official cause, accidental death from alcohol and drug interaction. No one suspected foul play. At Tammy's funeral, Paul acted as a grieving boyfriend. Karla wept alongside her parents, and both of them knew the truth. They had murdered her. But it didn't end there. After Tammy's death, Paul and Karla moved into a small pink bungalow in Port Dalhousie. It looked like the start of a new chapter. But behind its doors, the horror only deepened. Paul became more controlling, more violent. He beat Karla, isolated her from her family, and deepened his sadistic cravings. And Karla, still desperate for his approval, continued to enable him. In 1991, they invited a teenage friend of Karla's over for a sleepover. They drugged her, just like Tammy, and Paul assaulted her while Karla watched. The girl survived, unaware of what had happened. That same year, Paul was growing frustrated with the lack of control he had over the outside world. He wanted a new victim, someone who wouldn't just be a pawn, but a possession. That's when they found Leslie Mahaffey. She was 14, lost, locked out of her house, invulnerable. Paul approached her with sympathy, lured her in, and she disappeared. Her story would later shake the nation, but in that moment, she became another secret buried beneath the illusion of suburban peace. Meanwhile, Paul's DNA still sat in the backlog, untested. Had it been processed earlier, he would have been identified as the Scarborough rapist. He would have been arrested. Tammy might still be alive. Leslie might have been saved. But bureaucracy failed, and Paul remained free. Karla, too, was becoming harder to recognize. Once a bright, ambitious teenager, she had now become a shadow of herself, controlled, abused, and complicit. Yet even in her bruises and silence, she still stood by Paul. She was no longer a bystander. She was a partner. Together they planned, filmed, and executed their crimes. Their love story had become a blueprint for horror, and the mask they wore in public, smiles, politeness, normalcy, fooled everyone. They went to weddings. They took vacations. They laughed at family dinners, all while keeping victims chained in their home. This was the mask of normalcy, the illusion of perfection, a deadly facade that allowed two monsters to move freely among us. And the worst was still to come. The evening of June 14th, 1991, was quiet in Burlington, Ontario. Summer break was nearing, and 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey, a bright and cheerful teen, was heading home after being out with friends. She found herself locked out, having missed curfew. Alone in the dark, she waited on the porch, unaware that someone nearby was watching her. That someone was Paul Bernardo. He approached casually. He didn't look dangerous, just another friendly face offering help. He smiled, offered her a cigarette, and made small talk. Then everything changed. Paul brought Leslie to the house he shared with Karla Homolka. What followed inside was not visible to the world. Behind closed doors, a disturbing nightmare unfolded. The couple restrained her, and for hours they filmed her, manipulated her, and subjected her to cruel treatment. Leslie, frightened and vulnerable, tried to survive, but by the next day, she was gone. According to their later testimonies, Leslie had seen their faces. One claimed she died by accident. The other insisted it was intentional. What's clear is that a young life was stolen in the most callous way, a gruesome cover-up. After her death, Paul and Karla attempted to hide the evidence. They dismembered Leslie's body and encased the remains in blocks of concrete. On June 29, 1991, fishermen at Lake Gibson stumbled upon one of the blocks. Inside was part of a human body. Over the next few hours, authorities recovered all the remains. Dental records confirmed the identity. Leslie Mahaffey had been murdered. The country was stunned by the cruelty. Police had no suspects yet, but the case had become a national tragedy. That same day, something shocking happened. Paul and Karla got married. The honeymoon killers. On June 29, 1991, the very day Leslie's remains were discovered, Karla wore a white wedding dress and smiled for photographs at a picturesque church ceremony. Guests clapped, cameras flashed. The couple looked like something out of a magazine, but they were hiding something unfathomable. Their so-called fairy tale wedding masked a reality few could imagine. They had just taken a young life, and no one suspected a thing. Another disappearance. On April 16, 1992, 15-year-old Kristen French, a smart and athletic student, was walking home from school in St. Catharines. She never made it. Paul and Karla approached her under the pretense of asking for directions. As Kristen tried to help, Paul forced her into their vehicle. She vanished in broad daylight. For the next 3 days, she was held captive. The couple recorded every moment, attempting to manipulate and control her. Kristen, however, fought back. She refused to comply with their demands, holding on to her dignity despite the circumstances. Her resistance, many believe, led to her tragic end. On Easter Sunday, her body was discovered in a ditch. The nation mourned again. Her hair had been cut, and there were clear signs she had been restrained. People were terrified. A serial predator was on the loose. The police formed a dedicated task force, but Paul and Karla continued to live freely. A breaking point. Behind closed doors, their relationship was unraveling. Paul had become more aggressive. Karla, frequently seen with unexplained bruises and injuries, was clearly living in fear. In January 1993, Karla was hospitalized after a violent encounter. This time she spoke up, first to her family, then to the authorities. She told them everything about Leslie, about Kristen, about what had happened in their home. She revealed that they had videotaped their crimes. The authorities were stunned. The search for the tapes. In February 1993, police raided the couple's home. They seized items, but the tapes weren't found right away. Paul had hidden them in a ceiling fixture. Later, Paul's lawyer found the tapes, but withheld them for months. When they were finally turned over, investigators were horrified. The videos didn't just show Paul in action. They showed Karla participating. Her role was far more active than she had originally claimed. But by then, a deal had been made. A controversial deal. To secure her cooperation, prosecutors had already offered Karla a 12-year sentence for manslaughter. In exchange, she agreed to testify against Paul. When the tapes surfaced, the public was outraged. They revealed a level of involvement that shocked even seasoned investigators. But the deal stood. It was legally binding. Justice and injustice. Paul Bernardo was arrested in 1993 and charged with multiple serious crimes, including murder and assault. At his trial in 1995, the jury was shown portions of the tapes. The public never saw them. Reporters could only describe them in vague terms as the content was deemed too disturbing. Paul was found guilty on all counts. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole and was declared a dangerous offender. Karla, having served her time, was released in 2005. She changed her name, started a new life, and eventually had children. The mask of perfection. The media had once dubbed them the Ken and Barbie Killers because of their looks. The flawless couple with sparkling eyes and bright smiles. But behind that image was something terrifying. Two individuals who planned, filmed, and executed unimaginable cruelty, all while hiding behind charm, family ties, and suburban normalcy. A haunting legacy. The story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka isn't just about the acts they committed. It's about how evil can wear a mask. It can laugh with you, attend your wedding, sit beside you at dinner, and still be planning the unthinkable. This is the Untold Trace. If this story impacted you, like, comment, and subscribe for more documentaries that reveal the darkest truths hidden in plain sight. It was the winter of 1993 when the mask of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka finally shattered for the world to see. After years of evading justice, the couple at the center of Ontario's darkest modern horror story were in custody. The House of Horrors had been searched, and Karla's chilling confession was already in motion. But what came next would ignite outrage across the nation, a plea deal that would forever stain Canada's justice system. The first to fall. Karla Homolka had approached law enforcement not as a suspect, but as a battered partner seeking help. The bruises covering her face, arms, and back told a story of prolonged abuse at the hands of Paul. She claimed she was a victim, trapped in a violent relationship, and manipulated into silence. At first, investigators were inclined to believe her. What reason would she have to lie? When she told them about the disappearances, the hidden tapes, and the fate of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, it was enough to shake even the most seasoned officers. But there was a problem. Without the videotapes, there was no way to confirm the extent of her involvement. So, in exchange for a full confession and testimony against Paul, prosecutors struck a deal with Karla Homolka. In 1993, she agreed to plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter in exchange for a 12-year prison sentence. The public hadn't heard the full details yet, but behind closed doors, prosecutors believed that they had just secured their star witness. What they didn't know was that they had made a deal with someone far more involved than she had let on. The discovery of the tapes. Just weeks later, investigators would uncover what Karla hadn't told them. During a search of Paul's home in Port Dalhousie, police failed to locate the incriminating tapes she had described. They were well hidden, concealed in a ceiling light fixture in the upstairs bathroom. Paul's defense lawyer, Ken Murray, discovered them independently. And instead of handing them over immediately, he held on to them for 17 months. During this time, Karla had already signed her plea deal and been quietly sentenced. But once the tapes finally surfaced, the truth about her role in the crimes came to light. She was not just an accomplice. She was an active participant. A nation betrayed. The content of the tapes was never released publicly, but those who viewed them, jurors, prosecutors, and investigators, described them as deeply disturbing. According to court transcripts and restricted reporting, the videos showed Karla engaging in acts of cruelty, degradation, and manipulation. She wasn't coerced. She wasn't under duress. She laughed. She joked. She encouraged Paul. To many, the image of Karla as a helpless victim crumbled entirely, but the deal had already been signed. Her sentence couldn't be reversed. This sparked outrage across Canada. The media dubbed it a deal with the devil. Public opinion turned harshly against the Crown prosecutors. Demonstrations erupted outside the courtroom. Victims' families were devastated. Had the tapes been discovered sooner, Karla might have faced a murder trial alongside Paul and possibly spent the rest of her life behind bars. Instead, she would be out before her 36th birthday. The trial of Paul Bernardo. In 1995, Paul Bernardo finally stood trial. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of sexual assault, and related offenses. The Crown's case was strong. Along with physical evidence and Karla's testimony, they had the damning video footage, enough to make convictions nearly certain. The trial was held under heavy security. Public interest was intense, and the courtroom was restricted to protect the identities and dignity of the victims. The tapes were played only for the jury and the judge. Reporters could describe the reactions, but not the content. Those who watched were deeply affected. Some jurors wept. Veteran officers left the room in silence. One detective reportedly left the profession shortly after the trial. The victims, Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen French, and others, were posthumously given back their names as their suffering was finally acknowledged in a court of law. The verdict. After a high-profile trial that lasted months, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty. Paul Bernardo was convicted on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole and was officially declared a dangerous offender, a legal status in Canada that makes a release virtually impossible. He was transferred to a maximum security prison in Ontario, where he remains today under constant surveillance. His parole requests have been repeatedly denied and met with public condemnation each time they arise. Karla's new life. While Paul sat behind bars, Karla served her time at several facilities across Canada. Despite the backlash, she maintained her narrative, that she had been a manipulated young woman, brainwashed by a controlling partner. But the tapes told a different story, and her seemingly comfortable time in prison, including receiving visitors and pursuing educational opportunities, only fueled the anger of a grieving nation. In 2005, Karla was released from prison. She changed her name, moved to Quebec, married the brother of a lawyer, and later became a mother. Her quiet reintegration into society drew intense media scrutiny. Protesters followed her wherever she went. Schools and communities raised alarms. She became one of the most reviled figures in Canadian history, not just for her crimes, but for the justice she seemingly escaped. Public fallout. The Bernardo Homolka case changed how Canadians viewed their criminal justice system. The plea bargain process in particular was heavily criticized. Officials involved in the deal faced scrutiny and were forced to publicly defend their actions. The case also prompted legal reforms, especially around how evidence, particularly video recordings, should be handled. New standards were introduced to ensure that no similar situation could occur again. More broadly, the public learned a harsh truth. Appearances can be deceiving. Evil does not always come wearing a scowl. Sometimes it smiles. A chilling legacy. Decades have passed since Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka were arrested, but their legacy remains carved into Canada's national memory. Documentaries, podcasts, and books have revisited the case time and again, always wrestling with the same difficult questions. How did no one see the signs? Could Leslie and Kristen have been saved? And how did Karla walk free? The answers may never bring peace, but they serve as a chilling reminder that darkness often hides in plain sight. Time moves on, but wounds like these never fully heal. The case of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka didn't just end with prison bars and legal closure. It left an entire country scarred. The aftermath, the ripple effects, and the haunting presence of unanswered questions still linger across Canada. For the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, justice felt incomplete. Their daughters' lives were reduced to headlines and court testimonies, and the woman partly responsible for their deaths was now free. This is the legacy left behind, not just of crime, but of consequences that still divide a nation. The public remembers. More than 3 decades later, the public memory of the case hasn't faded. In fact, it's only grown stronger. For many Canadians, especially those who lived through the 1990s, the names Bernardo and Homolka trigger a visceral reaction. The crimes were so calculated, so deeply violating of community trust, that they became part of the nation's collective trauma. Schools discussed the case. Parents became more cautious. Communities looked over their shoulders. Even those far from Ontario felt the echo of fear. A ghost behind bars. Paul Bernardo remains incarcerated in a maximum security prison. He's been classified as a dangerous offender, one of the rarest and most serious designations under Canadian law, ensuring he will likely never be released. But every few years, something stirs the anger again. Under Canadian law, even the worst offenders are permitted to apply for parole hearings, even if their chances are near zero. Paul has applied, and each time victims' families, advocacy groups, and the public rise up in protest. His parole hearings have never lasted long. His lack of remorse, his demeanor, and the weight of the evidence ensure that any request for release is denied almost instantly. But for families like the Mahaffeys and Frenches, the very existence of these hearings is like ripping open a scar. Each time he speaks publicly, he revives the pain. And each time the public is reminded that justice may confine a man, but it doesn't erase what he did. Life after prison, Karla's return. Of the two, it is Karla Homolka's release that has caused the most controversy and confusion. In 2005, Karla was released from prison after serving her 12-year sentence. By then, she was in her mid-30s. She had changed her name, attempted to rebuild her identity, and eventually settled in the province of Quebec. Within years of her release, Karla married the brother of her former lawyer and started a family. By 2010, she was living under the name Liane Bordelais, raising children and maintaining a relatively low profile. But she never stayed hidden for long. Journalists tracked her down, community members spotted her, and soon word spread. The once notorious woman, linked to 2 of Canada's most chilling crimes, was now dropping her kids off at school like any other parent. The outrage was swift. Schools, protests, and surveillance. In 2017, reports emerged that Karla was volunteering at her children's school, reading to students, assisting in classrooms. Parents were horrified. While Karla had served her sentence and legally had no restrictions, many believed she should never be allowed near children. Petitions were launched. Media swarmed the neighborhood. Protesters appeared at the school gates. Some argued she had a right to rebuild her life. Others believed her past actions disqualified her from any normal public role. Eventually, she stopped volunteering, but the tension never fully faded. Every time Karla appeared in public, whether shopping, traveling, or even just being recognized, the backlash followed. The question was always the same. Should someone involved in such horrific crimes be allowed to live freely? Legally, the answer is yes, but morally, the debate remains open. The victims' families. For the Mahaffey and French families, grief never ended. Leslie and Kristen were more than victims. They were daughters, sisters, students, and bright young lives taken far too soon. Their families have spoken out in the decades since, pushing for change, raising awareness about violence against women, and protecting the memory of their girls from being buried beneath the notoriety of their killers. They've attended parole hearings, given interviews, and established scholarships and memorials. Every step forward is both a tribute and a painful reminder. They never asked for this role, but they continue to carry it with quiet strength. Cultural fallout. The Bernardo and Homolka case has permeated pop culture, legal studies, and media for years. It has inspired documentaries, films, podcasts, and endless commentary. But unlike some true crime cases that are sensationalized or glamorized, this one carries a deep sense of discomfort. The images of Karla smiling on her wedding day, Paul's chilling composure during interviews, the reality of what happened behind closed doors. It's not entertainment, it's a warning. A reminder that real evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks like a picture-perfect couple. Lasting reforms. Legally, the case changed Canada. Plea bargain. Scrutiny. After public outrage over Karla's deal, the Canadian justice system introduced new measures to ensure more transparency and judicial oversight in future plea bargains, especially in serious cases. Handling of evidence. The delay in submitting Paul's DNA and the late discovery of the tapes exposed flaws in the handling of critical evidence. As a result, forensic processing procedures were tightened and protocols were updated. Untold, victims' rights. Advocacy, victims' voices were amplified after this case. Families were granted more presence during trials and parole hearings. Victim impact statements became a standard part of sentencing. Reflection. Who walks free? The central tension that still haunts this story is not just about crime, it's about freedom. Paul remains in a cell, confined for life, but Karla walks among us. People have spotted her at the grocery store, sitting at cafes, walking her dog. And it's that image, the idea that someone so deeply involved in such horror can blend back into everyday life, that unsettles Canadians most. Because if she can walk free, then who else could be hiding in plain sight? What justice leaves behind. Justice, when delivered, doesn't erase trauma. It doesn't resurrect victims. It doesn't always feel complete. What it does offer is a moment of reckoning, a pause in the chaos where accountability is named and consequences follow. But when justice is flawed, when deals are made in the dark, when survivors feel betrayed, the damage can be even deeper. The Bernardo and Homolka case wasn't just a criminal tragedy. It was a moral and societal one, and the ripples of it continue to touch new generations who learn about it for the first time. The final echo. As of today, Paul Bernardo remains behind bars. Karla Homolka lives quietly, her face aging, her name changing, but the shadow of her past always following. And the names of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French continue to be spoken, not as footnotes, but as the true core of this story. They are the reason it matters. They are the reason we remember. This is the Untold Trace. If this documentary moved you, comment, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Because remembering isn't just about the past, it's how we protect the future.